Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting. And today we have two wonderful returning guests. I get the privilege of introducing the first one. Damian Zikakis is back with us. Damian is a friend of the show, having been on past episodes about relator, learner, and input. Damian is an ICF, Gallup, and a fellow Eat to Grow certified coach who provides strengths-based coaching workshops and executive coaching. Damian was also selected earlier this year to become a TED Fellows coach, and he joins us from his wonderful home in Holland, Michigan. Thank you for joining us, Damian.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be
Welcome
back.
back.
Yeah. Did I miss anything? Anything new in your intro that I should have included?
Nope. You've covered it all.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Well, great. It's good to have you back. And it's my privilege to welcome back Brea Roper. And Brea is with us, and you might remember her from our very last episode on Woo. So our Woo friend is back. And for those of you who haven't met her, Brea is our fellow Eat to Grow and Gallup certified strengths coach. She's high energy and extremely knowledgeable, and truly delighted in finding the hidden talent and potential in people. So Brea has been drinking the strengths Kool-Aid, as she says, for the last 20 years, but went all in with her business and got certified 7 years ago and launched her company, Strength and Story. She's a full-time consultant, facilitator, and coach. She's also an international speaker and published author, and she's been featured on stages and pages across the US and Europe, and a castle in Ireland, which I think is a really cool little note, has been in the pages of Success magazine, and, for the second time now with the Thoughtful Talent Show. Welcome, Brea.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Great. So before we dive right in, we've invited our guests today to talk about the Clifton Strength Talent theme of communication. So Brea, tell me where this falls for you in your top 5.
Number one, solid.
Number one.
Yeah.
Nice.
Number one. Yeah.
And Damian?
So it falls number 5, but for me, it reminds me of something I learned during training that was, don't get too hung up on the order of your top 5 because they can be tightly clustered. And so it's right up there for me. And it's probably as evident as any of my other 5 in regular daily interaction with me.
Chad and I have said that from the beginning, that we knew we had to have you on for communication. So absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both for joining us today. Chad, do you want to share with us the short description from Gallup about the Clifton Strength Talent theme of communication?
Yes. So I will just say, I do have to build off of Damian's comment, though, about having it tightly clustered, because one of the things I found fascinating when I went to prep for this is that, Jen, yours and I's communication are tightly clustered at 22 for me and 23 for you.
Yeah.
So this will be a very interesting conversation with Damian talking about clustering.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for the standard definition, Gallup defines this theme as follows: people exceptionally talented in the communication theme generally find it easy to put their thoughts into words. They're good conversationalists and presenters. So as that is our starting place, I'm going to first start by asking Damian, how does this personally show up for you? And obviously, Brea, I'm going to come right back to you too, but I want to hear from Damian first. How does this show up for you?
So for me, it's one that has also been helpful to me in understanding the concept of raw versus mature talents. Or if we don't manage our talents, they might manage us.
Yeah.
And so people high in communication tend to like to tell stories, and I love to tell stories. I'm telling one right now. And so the challenge for me, the opportunity and the challenge for me has been to tighten up those stories, get to the point quickly, because I know if the audience wants more, they'll ask for more. But it shows up with me in storytelling, I would say. And the other way that it shows up is uncanny may be too strong a word, but definitely a very strong ability to know what a good word is in a situation and recognize when a word choice isn't good. When others are speaking, and sometimes I can help them think of a different word in a coaching setting, for example. But in everyday life, I spot typos in written material in a like ridiculous way. Words left out, extra words put in, words spelled wrong in the wrong order. And as a raw talent, I am eager to help other people fix that because it makes me uncomfortable. And so I'm high in empathy. So well, maybe it's projecting. I don't know. Anyway, I think that they would want to know, particularly if they're a public figure or, an influencer or whatever. So I'll reach out to people via back channel and say, hey, I noticed this mistake. I thought you might want to fix it. Hope you don't mind me reaching out. And the reactions I've gotten have varied. They're always polite, but sometimes reading between the lines, they're not really happy that somebody spotted this.
But is it happy with you, unhappy with you, or unhappy with their own abilities to get it out there, right? So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Feel free anytime to give me feedback like that. I appreciate it. Awesome.
As do I.
What a cool way it shows up. That's awesome.
Brea, how about you?
Well, I'm just nodding my little head along because all of that resonates with me too. But I think for me, the core, the foundation of the communication talent is really it brings clarity in communication. So words matter, and words matter a lot. Like Damian said, finding the right word. But for me, it's really about clarity. It's about making sure that what I'm trying to say is actually connecting. It's coming through and people are understanding. That's super, super important for, I think, communication, the communication talent, and also making sure that other people are being heard, that when they're trying to communicate something that there's clarity there. And if there's any confusion, if I can tell, I think I like the word uncanny, Damian. I'm gonna steal it. I'm gonna borrow it. Like there's an uncanny ability to just like I just know when someone's not being heard, whether that's me or someone else, when they're not being understood, when they're trying, but people just aren't connecting with whatever they're trying to say. So I love that about the communication talent. Yeah.
And I've seen that on you already in multiple times, Brea, and just our short time being together. It seems like if I'm jumbled up with words, then next thing you know, you come in and like swoop it all up and tie it all up with this nice little bow. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I meant to say.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love these. So let's go a little bit to the like dark side and then bring it back to the positive. But so we know all of our talents, like Damian already started to talk about, when they're raw or when we've let them like do their own thing, they tend to grow legs and run off on their own and maybe get us into trouble instead of helping. So Brea, share with us some of those times and moments where your communication might have like maybe get you in a little bit of trouble or you feel like you have to calm it down.
Yeah. Honestly, it's hard for me to tell how much of this is the communication talent versus just me being a verbal processor, because I don't think that those are necessarily the same thing. I think there are verbal processors that don't have the talent of communication. But for me, I am a very, very high verbal processor. You are, Jen. You're a verbal processor.
I was gonna half raise my hand too.
Yeah. So I don't know how much of that, actually relates to the communication talent, but there are many, many times where I have a lot of words, and it just comes out and it's not actually helping me communicate with people because they can tune it out pretty quickly.
Oh, sure.
Or if I have a need to think through my mouth, like I have to like say the words in order to really come to an understanding of what it is that I'm even thinking before I even think about how to communicate it. Right. So the process can be long and tedious sometimes, but it always comes to a place of clarity. You know, like I said, there's might be a few iterations, but we'll get there, you know.
You shared with me before about like when you were younger, you were always in trouble. What for?
Always. I mean, really, like every day.
David immediately starts putting it himself. This is great.
Yeah. If you're around, if you're, you know, your parents or your teachers or whoever, you know, is around you growing up, like, I mean, nobody likes the kid who's talking all the time in class, you know, and we're always in trouble for that. But you know, you could move me to any corner of the room, put me by any person. I mean, I have woo, like I'm talking to everybody all the time, you know, like that's not gonna help. But yeah, if people don't understand the child's need to communicate, right? And they squash it down, it almost makes it worse, you know. It's like a pot that's just like boiling over, or the little Jack in the Box, you know, where it's like down, it's like
you're just ramping it up at that point. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
So I want to build on that, because Brea, when you and I have had conversations, I remember very early on when you and I connected, you often talked about sort of your tone, you know, that comment of watch your tone, you know, whether it's young man or young lady. But could you, I know that has sometimes also gotten you in trouble with in your past, and I'm not trying to pick on the negative side of this too much, but I thought it was a really interesting comment you've made in the past that I wanted to see if you could highlight for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that, because it is such a huge gift of the talent of communication, is the tone of delivery, right? It's all communication. I think the talent is a lot about how things are delivered, right? And that can include tone. But when you're young, or when it's raw, like Damian said, you know, if you're not aware, that tone can be a runaway train. You know, it can come across maybe depending on the other surrounding talents, right? Which I have a lot of other influencing talents, like command or self-assurance, that can make it be very aggressive, you know, or maybe direct to the point where people feel like I'm attacking them, or gosh, I heard a lot from adults when I was young. You know, they would think that I was challenging them, you know, or attack is not the right word, but more of a challenge. And I just was seeking clarity, right? My communication wanted that clarity, and it knew that I wasn't being heard. And so I would fight.
It got
back,
stronger.
You know, talk back, you know? But it wasn't that. It wasn't a disrespect for the person in front of me or for that relationship. It really was just an emotional need to be heard, you know? So I think the tone of voice is so interesting, because it's the power and the edge, and like when it's left unexamined, you know, and unrefined, it can really be hurtful. So
thank you for clarifying that, because I thought that was something really powerful that you'd share with me before.
Thanks.
Okay, how about you, Damian? I know you were pointing at yourself, like
I probably spent half to 2/3 of my grade school years in the hall. That was the punishment in that era. Or you know, I did get whacked with a board one time, but because that was also the punishment of the era. But I spent a lot of time in the hall because I was disruptive by talking. And oftentimes, you know, now that I'm older and I've seen the exact same trait in my younger son, who's 35 now, but when he was in grade school, I think it was that I processed stuff faster than others, and therefore I wanted to talk about it, or even find the humor in something, and that was not welcome. because the teacher is supposed to be in control of the classroom, not, this third grader that hijacks it from the fourth row on the right-hand side. And of course I couldn't help it. I think nowadays, maybe that would have been suspected as ADHD or something like that. And I wonder if what is diagnosed as that isn't just,
Communication.
somebody like you or me, Brea, that just has stuff to say. So that's why I was pointing at myself. I totally relate to that. And I have been told I have a good sense of humor that's a dry sense of humor. And I think part of the dryness, if you will, comes from the communication talent of seeing connections. I'm also high in connectedness. So I'll see things that others don't see, which often can be funny if you point that out. Right. Particularly in the arrangement of words. There's humor sometimes when you change the order of different words. So anyway, one of the ways that it also has can be a challenge to me, not so much get me in trouble, but maybe is that I'm not a verbal processor. I need time to think. Intellection is number 6 for me. Okay. But I am a visual processor. And so that's a way of communication also. So whenever I'm working on a new slide deck, I can spend 45 minutes trying to find the image that conveys what I want to convey. Once I learned that slide decks shouldn't have words on them, like, I would have a ton of words. And that's sometime around 2012, I learned that, that's not a good slide deck. So then I set out to find the right image. And one that I still struggle with to this day is talking about developing your strengths. Find a picture for that. They're all people in a weight room. There's nothing like,
yes.
Right.
And so anyway, I'm high input, high learner. And so I can go down a rabbit hole trying to find the right image. And then, of course, when I do find it, when the image comes up, I want to tell the story about the image rather than the content of the workshop.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, I love it.
Oh,
Love
great. Well, so you've already started to tap on some of these ways it's just amazing and how these come through. So let's talk about those specifically for each of you. I want to hear about how you believe the communication theme itself. I know it's your own because of your bundle of what's surrounding it, but what are ways that you can really attribute to communication that you feel like it has benefited your life, your work, family, things? Let's start with you, Brea.
Well, I think I love my communication talent. So pardon me if I gush, but I do think that it's so helpful in connecting with people. I have communication number 1 and then woo number 2. So I establish quick connections with people through words. And part of that might be my own words, my positivity communication offers a compliment, or sometimes it's hearing the words that other people are using and just being able to really quick kind of fall into their language, their speak. I am in the middle of an epic road trip right now, and I don't even know how many states I've been in the past few days, and I have been going further south, and it's just very easy to fall into a thank y'all, or whatever I hear around me. Communication, it just picks it up and it uses it, and I think that's really helpful in wooing, or in connecting with people and building relationships, because people hear how they talk, and it's familiar. So the same is true in coaching. I can hear their strengths, come through, because communication is so attentive to the words. And so I know when people use the word, I don't know, responsibility is easy, because that's the name of the theme. But also people with responsibility will talk a lot about the responsibility that they feel, for something. And communication picks up on, on that really easily. So I think it's helpful in so many ways, but
Yeah,
those are-
you
yeah.
shared before about that, like that in your coaching business specifically, like even if the people aren't saying something, your communication is even picking up on what they're not saying and being able to reflect that back. Can you go a little deeper into that?
Yeah, I do think that, part of that is, again, it comes back to clarity. It comes back to that desire to really hone in on what's the message here. The words are good, but like, what are they actually trying to say? And sometimes, yeah, you can hear what is said and you can hear what's not said. Communication can read between the lines to understand. I mean, Damian might use empathy, to read between the lines and to feel. I think my command is very helpful in finding that clarity, or strategic might, be picking up on word patterns. Like, it's just so interesting to hear think about how all the themes work together. But yeah,
That's awesome. Thank you.
sure.
Damian, how about you? Where has this really helped you shine?
So it's really helped me a lot. So Relator is my number one, and it helps me connect with people quickly, but not many, not like Woo. But an example from my first job out of college, I was an auditor, kind of many people would consider that a pretty boring job. And one of the challenges in your early years is you're working on stuff that is where there's a lot of repetition and so on. And I remember having a client, and I was warned that the accounts payable clerk was horrible and didn't like us bothering her. And I oftentimes see negative things as a challenge as opposed to a discouragement. So, and of course, this was before Strengths had been published. This goes back to 1979. And I remember the woman to this day. I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I remember this woman. And I remember going up to her and saying, so you've got huge responsibility here with all, managing all this money and making sure the mistakes aren't made. Like, how did you get into this line of work? And nobody had ever asked her that question before. And when somebody said, seems like you're getting along with someone, my supervisor, how did you do that? And I shared, and he said, well, you don't care about the answer to that. I said, no, actually I do. Like, I'm kind of curious. So for me, and maybe it's the learner and input in combination with Relator, that I am naturally curious about things that I've found other people either hasn't even shown up on their radar or whatever. And it's a way for me to connect. Another example from sort of day-to-day life is sometimes, stopping somewhere for a coffee and seeing that the barista has a tattoo. And I'll say, so that's a really interesting message, because that's how I think. I think of that image as that. So what's the backstory there? And most people don't ask them that, or of our generation may look down on the fact that they have two tattoos or whatever. And so it's not like I'm going to become friends with this person, but with Relator High for me, I don't do it a lot, but when I do it, it's really effective. And with clients, it's been really effective. And with clients, and this might be my last part of this answer, is when I hear somebody struggling with a word, an alternative comes up for me pretty easily, almost like a walking thesaurus. And I'll say, would this word make sense to you? Brea, you brought up the word responsibility. If they were struggling to say, I just feel like I need to get it done, I might say, so would you say you have ownership over that? Like it's a need? And they're like, yeah, exactly. And so it's those moments of helping somebody else find a word or find their voice that deepens the relationship between coach and client.
Oh, that's a great one. And I love that you brought up the thesaurus, because we had shared earlier when we were talking before about the communication talent, like almost being, you guys are walking thesauruses. You always can find the other
Yeah.
words that might fit better. Oh, I love that.
And I just have to say, it's interesting to me to hear, Brea help find stories for people, hear what they're saying and sort of reconvey it. And Damian, it's not that you're doing the opposite, but that you want to know the backstory behind something, and that words seem to be really important to you, Brea. And Damian, you do a lot more of your communication or reflection through imagery. You've already mentioned, finding pictures and tattoos and so forth. And not that you both can't do the opposite, but just that the highlight between the two, these small nuances, I think, are what make these sorts of conversations so interesting and so powerful, particularly for people that are first learning about their themes. So I really want to highlight those two things, and really want to thank you for helping us understand that this can come out in a couple different ways. So just my reflection on hearing what you were saying. Not that I have communication super high, so I'm not going to reflect back the same way you are, but that was my takeaway. So I'm curious. Sorry, I took down one of my questions because I was already starting to write some new notes because you were sharing some wonderful things. You both have already touched on some themes that you readily pair with your communication. Brea, you've already mentioned command and communication, woo, which we had you on for the last episode for, which is awesome. Damian, you've already mentioned input, learner, relator. I'm just wondering if there are certain talent themes that you almost always go to that have really led to maybe your success in using your communication theme. And Damian, I want to start with you first on this one.
I guess it would be learner and input. As I think back, and I'm curious, Brea, if this will resonate with you. I would have described myself years ago, again, before strengths, as a bit of a word nerd. I love words so much. I used to keep a paperback dictionary in my car, and as entertainment on road trips. Now, again, this is long before cell phones were even an idea. I literally had a paperback dictionary in my car, and sometimes a thesaurus too. And on road trips, it'd be a fun game. Like, let's open up a book and find a new word. It's like, and I knew that was really nerdy, and I was totally okay with that. I owned it. And that's really, learner and input, both right there. I've had books on grammar. I have books on idioms. Like, where did, I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but where did some of the idioms that we all use, 6 of one, half dozen the other, where did that come from? The first time I shared that with my son when he was about 14, he said, "That's the same thing. That doesn't make any sense." It is the same thing. That's the whole point of it.
Right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think it's such a perfect example of how the themes around the theme, like, it changes so much,
Right.
Learner and input both, I think, seek information, right? So you're going and you're looking for those things. That is very rarely me. But I will always respond to something that's in front of me, right? So my nerdy word nerd, application of that, when I was growing up, I had a 3x5 index card, like plastic box filled with index cards, where each index card had quotes on it, and I would just collect quotes, and I color coordinated them and organized them so I could find them. David gave me the heart. That's so cute. But quotes, words, I mean, it's just like communication loves that, right? So that's what I collected those, but I would never look for them. But when I read it, I was like, "Ooh, I got to write that down. I got to keep it."
Yeah. So going back to, so it's awesome to hear that you had two variations on the same thing. collecting thesauruses and dictionaries in the car, collecting quotes. Brea, I want to return just a little bit to the sort of the core question we had, which is, is there a particular theme that you tend to pair with communication on, a pretty steady basis, or that that if you want to bring out your best communication version, that you lean on to accelerate it?
Yeah. It's a tough question because this is number one and it is definitely number one for me. And what I mean by that is I almost see it like every other theme, it automatically just pairs with communication. So if any of the other 34 are needed, or I use it in some way, it's always through communication. For example, context is kind of low for me. History's never really been my jam. But if there's a story, if we watched a movie or we read a particularly interesting story about a person, because I have a lot of relationship themes as well, that story about a person, that's something that my communication could get behind, right? But facts and figures and all of that aspect of history, like, it was totally lost on me. Those are not my themes. I includer is another one where it's not super high for me, but I notice my communication notices when we're in a group and someone hasn't spoken. It wants to include them. It wants to make sure that their voice, has even an opportunity to be heard. I won't force them to talk, but my communication wants to make sure that they have that opportunity. So I'm not afraid to be the voice that says, hey, Jen, like, we haven't heard from you. What do you think?
Yeah.
So that's how I feel like it's kind of the opposite of your question, Chad, but that's really how I see it.
It's like that filter, right? Like, you can't help it. And I say that about my responsibility. Everything I do, and Chad will agree here, like, every time we have a conversation and I'm like bringing out, well, I think this is what's going on, he sees it through my responsibility filter. Like, he more often points out to me, I think that's like, you're feeling that responsibility, that ownership, and I can't help it. No matter what I do, it's like always there first. And it sounds like that's the same for you with your communication. Everything you do filters through how that's communicated, either to you or from you.
Yeah.
Discipline is, I think, number 32 or 33 for me. Deliberative is 34 for me. Details are not really my strength, okay? Except for when it comes to communicating a message. Then I am on top of it. Like Damian said, the slide deck, so important. Every image, the font that is chosen, the size of the font, the placement of everything on, like, the order of how we're talking, the entire presentation might be a full day, right? And everything is ordered in a way that conveys an overall message with individual smaller messages, right? The details are easy for me when it comes to that type of communication, but anything else, not really interested.
It harkens back to what Damian was saying about typos and mispunctuation and double words and missing words. So I'm hearing a lot of the same threads here.
Yeah, or even to that way, like Damian said, like, maybe you don't need all of the details, but for you guys, it sounds like communication does need all those details, and they want that, and it's important to the story and how things are going, the flow. So I love hearing that out of both of you. It just, in slightly different ways. Brea's is about getting that message across and making sure it's clear and the clarity, and Damian's collecting all that input and knows all the disinformation, and you need to know it too. So I love the sharing of this. Thank you guys. That's awesome.
So I want to ask another question that plays a little bit off this idea of theme dynamics. We know that none of our talent themes are working in silo. We've talked a little bit already about how this communication theme can get kind of away from you, where it's maybe had negative impacts on your life. I'm curious if when you get on a runaway communication sort of energizing run. Maybe you're taking it a little too far. It gets a little raw. Are there themes that you find helpful in reining that? I don't want to say reining it in, because we want to use our strengths, but maybe tamping it down, or just kind of
Managing
like you managing it. There's
Damage
a hey, I love somebody's trying to find me the right word. Thank you so much, Damian. Managing it in an effective way. So just as an example, like my deliberative can get run away thinking, what is the absolute worst case scenario? I need to think, I use my responsibility about, okay, what am I really after here? Why is this becoming such a big deal? That helps me, again, manage it. I'm wondering if there's any sort of similar dynamic for each of you when communication gets off on its own a little too strong. Both of you are shaking your heads, so I'm not sure which one of you wants to take this first. Brett, I'll come back to you, and then Damian, I'd love to hear what you have to say as well.
Sure.
Okay, me first.
Yes.
I don't know. I was thinking again a little bit differently than what you were asking.
Okay.
What comes to mind for me is actually, it's just a little nuanced. So communication is always ready to speak, right? In a raw state, unexamined, I just think everything that I have to say is important, and everybody needs to hear everything that is in my head,
Damian's agreeing with you very quickly.
Yeah. So step aside, whoever else, it doesn't matter. What I have to say is important, and everybody's going to listen. So being aware of my activator, being aware that I'm good at getting momentum started, at starting things, at moving things forward, has helped when, again, if I'm in a group situation and kind of like this, it's like, who's going to go first? I lean on my activator, and I just have decided that I'm going to be the one to talk first, because I know that it's hard for some other people to raise their hand and be like, I'll go, and that's easy for me. So also I've learned that it's usually the people who don't talk or talk last that actually have the most important things to say. And they need a little bit more time, right? So I'll say whatever's top of mind, which is probably not anything earth shattering, but what it does is it opens that door, right? So that hopefully we can actually get to something deeper much quicker, because we haven't wasted that time going back and forth, oh, I don't know if I want to talk. So leaning into my activator allows other people to speak. And then my communication listens to everything that everyone has to say. And then boom, at the end, it comes back and it summarizes with that nice pretty bow that Jen was talking about. And that's my real contribution, or where I feel like I add real value, is being able to just kind of wrap up what everyone else has said, and with a real punch, at the end.
Okay.
I love how you put the positive spin on that too, because what I heard you say was that sometimes communication's answering, even if you're not necessarily ready to answer. And as much as sometimes that gets in your way and can be a little on the raw side, you're also giving other people space and time. The deliberatives in the room, Chad and I, are going to sit here and we're going to think about it. And we're like, I'm not talking first because you're not going to like what I have to say, because we're coming from this practical, this isn't going to work, whatever. But now what Brea said makes total sense. Oh, but yeah, you're right. We could do that with this little twist, right? So you've given us that opening. So I like how you spun that just a bit. So I appreciate that answer.
Well, thanks. I think I spent a lot of my life not doing that, where I would just stay silent because I thought, this is way before strengths. I mean, this is when I was really, really little.
Yeah.
I would never raise my hand to speak. Or if the teacher asked for someone to read out loud, of course, my little communication always wanted to be the person to read out loud, but I thought everyone, right, wanted to read out loud, and I thought everyone wanted to speak. And so I shut my voice down because I wanted to give other people woo. Like I wanted to give other people the opportunity, right? And so when I learned that not everybody enjoys speaking in front of everyone, you know, like I do, then I said, okay, I'm just going to lean into that. You know, I'm going to offer it. I'm going to offer it
Nice.
first. And then if I need to come back and say more, I can, you know, but
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Damian, what's your take on this question of, you know, when communication gets going a little, you know, gets a head of steam behind it, and you need to, you know, manage it, as you said.
Yeah.
What is there a theme that you lean on, or a behavior that you lean into to
Yes.
do that?
And it took me a while to figure that out. Again, before I was deep into strengths, and now I realize how I figured it out. Part of it was feedback from my darling wife, who also is high in communication. And two aspects of that. One is I would tell stories that I love the detail. I'm not high in context, but I think that's my connectedness coming out. Like, and it was amazing that this person knew that person, and we were both going to the same city, and I'm telling all these details that really maybe aren't that amazing to other people. They're just not interested. And, you know, so we developed some code, or she did, which was like, you know, bring it home, Damian. Or when she started working in the aviation industry, you know, it's time to land that plane. Like, let's come on. And I also, so empathy is number 11 for me, but it's a very active number 11. It's when going through the training, it was one that I use on a very regular basis. So I drew the line under number 11 in terms of the ones that are really my top drawer. And I realized by leaning into that a little bit more, I could start to tell when people were less engaged. And therefore, it's time for me to land that plane. And so I'm aware of that. That awareness kicks on a minute into a story, where I start trying to sense what the reaction is, which has helped me doing workshops and even just general storytelling. The other aspect I was going to say that my wife helped me realize was the details don't have to be correct for the story to have impact. So she would start telling a story about the time our dog was lost by the airlines. And she would say, yeah, we were flying on American. And I'd say, well, actually, we were on Delta. And she'd be like, it doesn't matter. And I would correct her 3 times in the story. And then we'd get in the car later on. She'd say, you know, you don't need to do that. Like, you're interrupting the flow of my story, and nobody cares which airline it was. Like, so we have a shorthand now in our family that actually some of our close friends have picked up on it. Because I used to correct what, you know, she'd say, we went this place on Wednesday, and I'd say it was Tuesday. And she'd say, whatever. So the shorthand now is it was Tuesday. And that means shut up. It was Tuesday. Let me go on with my story.
Oh, I love that. So I regularly am replying with what has happened over the week or whatever, and always get the days wrong. And it's so important to me, for whatever reason, that I get like that it happened on this date. Wait, was it that day? And then I'm like doing this verbal processing in the middle of the story. And my husband's like, it doesn't matter what day it was. I'm like, but it does. And I don't know why it does. So I love that, Damian. My heart feels for you because I'm one of those. I like those details to be accurate.
And this is where one of the points where I say, hey, Jen, that's coming out of your responsibility.
Right. Oh, I love this.
Thank you so much for both those wonderful answers. Yes. It's interesting to hear both of you talk about, you know, listen to your audience. You know, Damian, you brought it up with your empathy and, you know, picking up on the messages. But Brea, you've also mentioned it throughout this episode of, you know, be able to react and maybe even rephrase or help people find that right message. Yeah. I think that's just a really interesting aspect of communication that I'm not sure. I would put myself in this group of, a lot of us think that communication is all about outgoing messages. Mm-hmm. And here you are, it's almost, you know, some other town themes get looped in, but there's also an aspect of this of really listening to what the messages of others are. And I think that might be something that a lot of people don't fully understand, at first glance about this communication talent. So I just want to just thank you for emphasizing that a little bit here.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that ties directly into kind of our next question and where we're going. Is this experience with our clients, or maybe some others that you've witnessed that have communication high? So for me, I've always noticed that people who are high in communication always have the best stories. Like, hands down, if I ask them how to do something, they're going to tell me a story about when they got it or where it came from or whatever that might be. Like, it always comes bundles with a story. So I think they have this wonderful ability. That's the one thing I noticed, like, across the board. Everyone with communication has wonderful stories to tell. But I wondered if there's some other, like, nuances, some different, like, new cool ways or interesting expressions of the communication talent that you've noticed or seen in others or yourself. Brea, I know you have, like, a cool one that you wanted to share with us, so I'd like to start with you.
Is that my love of jazz?
Yes, ma'am. You got it.
I do love jazz, and it clicked one day in a coaching conversation. Actually, my client asked me a question that gave me this insight, or that prompted this insight. I was like, wow, that's why, because I lead with communication, and jazz is literally a conversation between the musicians that's live and different every time, right? And there's a language, there's a standard song, that the musicians are playing or over. So there's a common language of how to play. Even like phrasing is so important in music, singing, but especially in jazz. Gosh, there are some singers who just, they can phrase their words in a way where it just, like, you feel what they're saying, and it's so moving when when they do that. And I see that, like, that's a communication talent, when it's a lot of times about the words, but a lot of time it's about the delivery. Yeah. How, it's said. Are they speeding up, and going faster to communicate a point or to create excitement or anticipation, or are they slowing down? Or are they so excited and and then all of a sudden they're like, ooh, and it creates intrigue and it pulls you in closer, right? That, I think, is a real beauty of the communication talent. And I just connected with that in jazz and musical theater and a ballad that tells a good story and, like, hits you in the heart. It's like,
Yeah.
The words that you can feel, like, that's my communication talent with my love of music. So
yeah,
Nice.
I loved that example that you shared with me before. So I really wanted, I'm so glad that you brought it. Thank you.
Well, anytime I can talk about jazz, I love it. So yeah.
Damian, have you noticed any, like, unique uses of communication like that?
I think one for me that has come out in my coaching. So as we know, communication isn't high for everybody, but I often, so I do a fair amount of career coaching, and with all of those clients, I have them take the assessment, the full 34, and we debrief it. And I ask them questions related to their career, or particularly even looking at a resume. And as we're prepping for interviews, and I'll say, which point under this job are you most proud of? Which bullet point under this job? And tell me about it. So imagine this is an interview situation. Tell me about it. And so they'll tell me, and they'll usually tell me in a pretty flat, brought this people together, did this work, and it's all factual and businesslike, et cetera, et cetera. and I'll say, so, we've been talking about your strengths, right? And a big part of understanding your strengths is understanding they're really how you're wired. And I want you to lean into the fact that you're different. I already shared with you the 1 in 287,000 or the 1 in 33 million. Like, you're 1 in 33 million. Like, you are different than any of the other candidates. And now you're in the interview stage. So really there's, 5 of you they're interviewing. Like,
Right.
Appreciate that difference. So for example, let me be you for a minute and tell the interviewer about this bullet point. And so then I employ some of the language of strengths, which is, maybe they're high in responsibility, or maybe they're high in analytical, or they're high in woo. And so I'll say, so we brought this group together and it was important that they gel pretty quickly. And I don't know if you're familiar with CliftonStrengths or not, but I'm high in relator. And so for me, it really brings me joy to see a group thrive and be part of that. And so I can, and blah, blah, blah. And so I will tell their bullet point through my knowledge of strengths, and they've got the same information in front of them that I do. I'm looking at their report, and I'll say at the end, what did you think of that? And they're like, how did you do that? and I'll say, that's not the right question. The right question is, how can you do that? So let's talk about it. And then I'll take them back to their strengths, and I'll say, look at the words, go through, it's one thing when you take somebody through the report for the first time and it's this abstract thing that they're not really sure what the value of it is. But now I've told their story with their details, and they're like, so I'll say, you take a highlighter or a pen and underline the words, blah, blah, blah. And so it's worked with people that had communication in the 30s or the teens or top 5. And so that's sort of, I feel like that's part of the secret sauce I have, helping people prepare for interviews, is think about themselves as uniquely powerful.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's back to that
language.
Delivery and the tone, right? And so I think I've said it before, like, we have to put the right emphasis on the right syllable, right? Like, you can't talk like that. No one understands what the heck you're saying, or they just laugh at you. Oh, it's that tone. And I love hearing from both of you. It's like Brea said, like, it's connecting to my soul. This music is really like hitting me in my heart. And then Damian, to hear like you reflect back the greatness of them in your own, making that tone. I love this. Like, it's so good. I see the power of the communication talent in both of you so strongly. I love it. Chad, do you have any new ones?
Not that's going to match up against
right.
Not
these
that this
two,
is a competition, but I'm not sure if I should be getting the ring with 2 wonderful communicators. The only example I was going to bring was that I had a client early on in my coaching career, and I think some of us have talked about the power of some of our first experiences. But I had an individual that had communication and individualization, and when we really got into it, it really astounded me how much, and the attention, kind of what Brea was talking about before in terms of the slide decks to his clients. So he was helping companies understand what benefit packages they could potentially structure. And just to hear him talk about how he used his communication in coordination with his individualization to really make sure each of his slide decks was quite unique depending upon the needs of each client. And yet it took him a little extra time, but he had those 2 superpowers working together to really individualize his message and his approach. And so it was a combo that's a little different than what we've talked about so far. So I just thought I'd bring it up, that as we've talked about, each of the themes influences each other in different ways, and depending upon what themes you have around you, really kind of influences the way each theme comes out.
Yeah.
And so it was just one other example that we hadn't talked about yet, is individualization.
Yeah. I love hearing, like, even just with having like the four of us on, hearing how these talents season one another, and how you can have the same talent but it looks so different. And I think that's the power and glory behind CliftonStrengths, is that we all use these tools differently, and it's beautiful to see that we are really are all different, so and unique in that way. I love it.
So I've got a question. We've gotten pretty deep into the theme at this point. I want to bring a little levity to this, maybe help people connect with this through a slightly different medium. Damian, you're going to love this because we're going to talk about images. I'm wondering if, when you think about your communication talent, whether it's yours personally or just in general, that, you know, sort of the standard definition, is there an image, a pop culture reference that comes to mind that, especially people that are first learning about this theme, or somebody that is related to or works with somebody that has this theme, that they might be able to kind of connect with, or be like, that's what that is? I'm wondering if you have an image, or, you know, it could be a household object, pop reference. Damian, I'm going to go to you first because you've brought up images already in this conversation. Sure. So I want to hear from both of you, but I'm going to go with Damian first. Yeah.
So when I was putting my first slide deck together, and I had a couple of pages that were this idea of clues to talent. When people have exhibit certain behaviors, patterns of thinking, feeling, behaving, that's a good clue that maybe they have that talent. And so one of the ones I wanted to talk about was communication. And the image I had was, I found online, of course, it was a picture of Steven Spielberg with some of his top movies, which include Jaws and E.T. and I forget what the other two were, but you know, you would recognize them if I could remember them. And so I put the image up and I asked people, you know, when you see this image, what do you think? What comes to mind? How would you describe this person? And right on cue, somebody raised their hand, storyteller. I said, bingo. So what theme? And somebody in the back of the room that had communication said, communication. Couldn't have scripted it any better. And so for me, that's communication at its best. Can move you emotionally, can inform you, all those things.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay. Brea?
Yeah, that's great. Mine is much less deep, a little bit more lighthearted, but I think of a megaphone. Truly, I think of my communication as an influencing talent. I'm here to take whatever message, whether it's my message or your message, whatever message needs to be heard, and I'm gonna shout it to the rooftops. I'm gonna make sure everybody hears. And it's not a microphone that someone can unplug, or drown out, because we hear it all the time. It's, it's the cheerleader with the megaphone that's like directed at a specific crowd, not just a microphone that's generally amplifying, that's what I think of.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Jen, I want to come to you to see if you have any images to add to this.
Mine kind of goes with Damian's. I was going back to like the old storybooks, you like actually like a story that draws you in, and yeah, so that's why mine, a storybook. Nice.
And I'm just going to offer up one. As we've said, this is not super high for me, but one image that does come to mind is a campfire. So it's almost a little bit of the opposite of what Brea was just talking about in terms of a megaphone and being super loud, but the campfire around, ghost stories and just telling stories around a campfire in whatever fashion that takes was one that I thought of in thinking about this theme. So I love all the images. This is helpful so that, hopefully our listeners will resonate with at least one of those. So thank you. Jen, do you want to ask our last couple questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So now we've really talked about you guys in particular and how this theme shows up for you and how it's worked well in your life and in places where it's been raw, and then the things you've needed to do to kind of overcome some of those things. And so now we really want to talk about how we can best interact with those who have this theme, and what advice maybe you could give leaders or peers to help the person who might be in a raw application. And Damian, you've shared, like, your wife is kind of that person for you in a lot of cases when she feels like your communication might be going a little on the raw side, or you're sharing a little too many details, or it doesn't matter what day that happened. So, what are some like advice or some ideas that you could share with our audience that might help a team leader or a peer of someone who has communication high, that we can help them, like, maybe come out of that raw space in a like pleasant way, because we know it's all positive. We were sharing all of this information for a real reason. We're trying to influence and get somewhere. Damian, I'm gonna start with you.
So is this for example, for a leader who has somebody on their team that's high in communication?
Yeah.
Or the leader?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I think, again, it's, people, there are clues to talent. So if you see somebody who every time you ask them a question begins a story, that's probably somebody that's high in communication. And so I think as a leader, it can be helpful to give them space to tell that story, and recognize that you may need to rein them in as well. And so
Okay.
when I was a recruit, I did executive recruiting for a while. And so I would ask people to tell me the story of their career. And I quickly realized some people, the wide range, some people would do it in a minute and some people would do it in 30 minutes. And so I realized I need to give some guidance. So I'd say, take 3 to 5 minutes and walk me through your career. And some people at 5 minutes, we'd still be talking about the first job out of college. And so I'd have, then for them, I'd say, okay, let's take it up to a higher level. Like, you're at the ground, let's go up to 10,000 feet. And because we've got a lot to cover in the next 50 minutes. So, those people probably were high in communication.
Yeah. Wow.
And didn't recognize it. And so I think for a leader, both of those sides, give them space to tell the story and help them to contain that story if that's necessary also.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. Brea.
Yeah, similarly, I'm all about creating space or creating opportunities for people to use their strengths. So if you have someone who's high in communication, and your company has a story that is worth telling, maybe you work for a nonprofit, where you depend on stories to keep the keep the water running,
Yeah.
give someone with that talent the opportunity to tell those stories. If you have a story that's worth telling, tap someone with that talent. They'll do it really, really well. And encourage people with communication to practice their stories. I don't know if it's just me because of a lot of other influencing talents I'm a fast thinker, and I feel like I can do it perfectly the first time, but I don't. The more I practice it, the more I refine it, the better I am. And so just because someone has that natural talent and they can talk in front of a room, lean into that, recognize that talent and then give them opportunities to learn the skill or to practice the story, so that they can really bring the fullness of their talent to that. And it will be much more, effective, transformational, whatever your goal is.
Right. Yeah, I've heard you say before too about that, like, it goes back to that tone of voice.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, maybe if they are practicing or they're, they have a listener there, they can get that, make sure that their tone of voice is where they want it to be. And like you were saying before, monotone, we're just talking about these 3 jobs I had before and they're really boring, but I was great at it.
Yeah. And that gets better as you watch your audience, the more that they tell the same story over and over again, they are comfortable with the story, and then they can really start paying attention to the jokes that people laugh at, or where are people responding, and then they learn to lean into that and really like milk it, but I think the other thing that you can do to help yourself as a leader, if you have someone with communication on your team, if their communication is verbally processing, and maybe they have ideation high also, or some other need to just like talk a lot. You know, they've got a lot of ideas, or they've got a lot coming out. As a leader, help yourself by asking them, you know, okay, do you want me just to listen? Do you want me to respond? Are you asking me to do something with this information? You know, if you lead with communication, use your words to say, I just need a sounding board. Will you be that for me? Or I am looking for some feedback. Will you listen to this speech and tell me, you know, what the theme is, or what are my top 3 takeaways, or whatever? Because sometimes communication can just verbally process, you know, and if you're a leader that leads with high, you know, high responsibility, high achiever, high whatever, like you might feel overwhelmed talking to someone, you know, who's just sharing a lot of ideas or just thinking out loud, right? So
yeah, personally, if you were, you know, sharing all of that with me and you didn't tell me that you didn't want me to do anything with it, you just needed a listener, I'd be like, okay, you want me to do this and this and this, and now these are all on my list to do. So yeah, I love that advice. That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you. And you brought another piece to it that I was going next to, was that about like helping a person be able to offer their best contribution to a team. And that was, like you said, like if you have a good communicator on your team and someone who's high in communication and you have a story that needs to be told. I love that you brought that. Damian, did you have another example of a way you can use, you know, one of your team members to really be the best contribution, bring the best contribution?
Just, I guess maybe an additional kind of related to that. So
yeah,
when I was working at the university and leading the career office, being high in communication, I wanted to be a part of our big messages to students about a particular thing. But I realized that some of the others on the team were high in communication and had a different perspective that might be closer to the student's perspective than mine. You know, I was in my 50s at the time, and our students were in their 20s or 30s. And so there was a receptionist that was, you know, on the org chart was probably the lowest level person in the organization and communication number 1. So we would draft something, and then I would take it to her and say, I want you to read this and give me whatever feedback. And she's like, you mean like scan it for typos? No. As if you were writing it. Like, this is the first draft. What changes would you make? And she was a little bit hesitant, like because it wasn't her job, right? She was greeting people when they came in the door. And I said, no. Here are the reasons why I'm asking this. And then, you know, her eyes lit up and she gave some great suggestions about things. Like, I was going into way too much detail about a particular thing. And she's like, I don't know that we need to put that in there, but what we should do is amplify this piece of it. And so I think, and for me being high in communication, I loved that because it made the end product better. And it wasn't about my ego, like I'm the one who wrote it. My goal was for the students to read it. You know, the reverse side of that we've been talking about, not for me to say it, but for them to read it. And so let's get it the best it can be. And here's somebody that can help make it better.
Yeah, this really reminds me of something, Brea, you and I have had this conversation around communication isn't so much about the exact words, but it's about the message. It's the, you know, the words of the document are helpful, and the typos and finding that aspect of communication we've talked about already, but it's actually the next level deeper that is really at the heart of this communication theme of being able to make sure that the message is getting through. What is almost the intention behind it? You know, I think you've also at times said about communication isn't so much about what you're saying. It's often about the delivery. I think you mentioned that earlier in this episode. So it's just really interesting to hear another really concrete example of that. You know, you handed over a document and she thought, oh, well, I'm just checking this for the typos, so the surface level stuff. And Damian, what you're pointing out is it's about the message of the document or message of the presentation or the message of the jazz performance that you were highlighting before, Brea. So really interesting example. And I think something that again, might get lost on some people when they think about, oh, communication, it's just about the thesaurus and the words and the spelling and the typos and where the punctuation goes. It's not. It's about the message. You keep coming back to that on a regular basis. So, interesting example. And it wasn't. Again, one of the other things I've learned about communication is you don't put words in their mouth. So I'm not trying to put words in either of your mouth, but I'm reflecting back what I'm hearing, what the message that I'm hearing from you is. Sure. So, correct me if I've got any of that wrong, but it's something I've picked up as we've gone through this episode.
It's really the communication talent is just, I think, very misunderstood a lot, because the word communication is such a part of our common vernacular that means something different. And so the skill of communication, or even just the act of communicating, it can be very different from the talent of communication. And I think the way that I see it in my brain is communication, the skill or the act of communicating is the what, and the communication of talent is the how, it's, and so I think in order to, back to your question, in order to help someone who leads with communication to bring that contribution, if you can give them opportunities to learn the skill of communication, one of the best things that I did for myself and for my business was to go get certified in a marketing framework called StoryBrand, which taught me the structure of story, which I had never even thought to consider that there might be an actual structure and an arc and all of that just seems so commonplace to me now. But I didn't know that until I started learning about what makes a good story. And it's not just the phrasing or the tone, but there are pieces in a particular order. And, so I was able to marry that skill with my talent. And now I can help clients with their marketing, telling their story, using their strengths, to tell their story, whether that's in an interview or in a speech or presentation or in their branding and their marketing. So
nice.
I think,
great.
Sorry, I know this is getting long.
You're good.
I have to say this. I think that I've learned communication as a talent, the storytelling, the metaphors, all of that is a great support, but it shouldn't be the way that information is delivered. So if all I do is ever talk in stories, people get lost really quickly because they're like, where's this going? How does this apply? I don't understand where this connection is. But if I can lead with my point, or what it is that I want them to know, and then support it with a story, support it with a metaphor, then they're like, oh, I get it, right? So they're not lost. They can really fully enter into that story because I've kind of opened,
kind of given them the little tidbit up front.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, this is almost a wonderful segue into the last question that we always ask at the end of each of our episodes. It'd be very easy for Jen and I to walk away and come away with our takeaways and list those off. But as good coaches, we know that it often comes best from the people that we're talking to. And so I'm just wondering if again, I'm gonna ask our communication experts here to do this succinctly. What are your two main takeaways that you think people should really come away from knowing about this communication theme? We spent a little over an hour talking about it. If we were to do maybe a shorts or bullet points on this theme, what would be your two takeaways? I'm going to give each of you two takeaways. What are they? Damian, I'm going to start with you first.
Okay. So the quick answer is I don't know. I have too many.
Too many.
Okay, so which is actually relevant to my takeaway,
Mhm.
which is I've been reminded a few times today of a quote attributed to Mark Twain, which is, "If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter."
Oh, okay.
And
Writing
so
that down. That's really
Yeah.
good.
editing that story down and getting it to, the real pithy parts takes work and can make it so much more powerful. And so for somebody who's trying to get better at communication, that's a takeaway I would say, is find ways to shorten it. Just a quick add-on, and then I'll come to my second point. Brea, I use a story framework with all of my career coaching clients, and I talk about Disney and the arc of a story. Introduce the protagonist, set up this situation, and then bring the story to a close. And in the tell me about yourself, the end of the story should be, and that's why I'm here with you today. That's the end of the story. The other thing I'll often say when they're giving me a long answer to about a bullet point is I'll say, lead with the punchline. Like say, so what we did was we increased sales 40%. And now I'll tell you how we did it. Because sometimes they'll go through all this long thing and you're waiting, like, when is the story going to end? I don't know how it's going to end. And people get in their own head listening. So tell them the punchline up front and then give the back.
Nice.
Okay, so the second point is really, well, so I was going to give advice, but I've already done that with one or two. So the other one would be, if you are close with somebody who's high in communication and you're not, capitalize on that, which we touched on, if you're a leader. Yeah, so that's my takeaway. Capitalize on that, help them get better or indulge them in their story. Don't correct them and tell them what day it was.
Nice. All right. 2 wonderful takeaways.
Yes.
Brea, close us out with your 2 takeaways, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah. So number 1, just because you have the communication talent does not make you a good communicator.
Bruce.
Not the same thing. So whether that's you or whether that's someone on your team, don't assume that they're a great communicator because that's the talent. It's not. It's not
the skill, like you said before. Yeah,
not the skill. Doesn't mean that they're a bad communicator. It just means that that's not the same thing. Okay. So now that we've got that out of the way, the second thing is, if you have the communication talent or someone who does, please look for ways to develop that talent, which really is about telling the story, or it's about communicating how you communicate it, right? Whether that's with words or visually, it can look or sound a lot of different ways. It doesn't just have to be a verbal processor or someone who's giving a speech. Communication talent really is about communicating effectively, and in a way that is influential. So people want to listen, it draws them in and it moves them to action. That's really the best place, and the best of the communication talent. It's not just that they can find words or that they can talk to a brick wall or that they can tell a great story, right, that makes everybody laugh. The best use of that communication talent is to provide influence in some way. So look for that opportunity for yourself or for the people on your team. What influence do you need, and how can I use the communication talent to get there?
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
Wonderful wrap up. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. As with every episode, I learned so much from our guests. I don't want to speak for Jen, but I'm going to take a wild guess that she probably got as much out of this as I did, if not more. So we very much thank you for spending an hour or so with us to really help others understand this communication theme at such depth. If you, our listeners, liked this episode, and enjoyed our conversation with Brea and Damian. We encourage you to leave us comments, like us, and subscribe on the various channels that we distribute this on. We will have Damian and Brea's information in the show notes, so you can get in touch with them.
And also, if you are looking for any more information or want us to talk about different topics or different talent themes, keep tuned in, because we will do that. But you can also reach out to Chad and I. Our information is also in the show notes.
Yes, sorry. So Jen always keeps me on my toes and makes sure we get everything covered. Until next time, I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting. My wonderful co-host.
I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching, encouraging you to be uniquely you.
And I'm going to keep
Thanks,
encouraging you
guys.
to play to your strengths. So until next time, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks, you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.